weather is pretty mild. It was always pretty much 90 degrees and super humid. Sometimes you get a really rainy day and you'd be biking through just torrential rain just pouring down like you're in a shower. That's probably the most extreme it gets. Malaysia is one of the most biodiverse countries on the planet, and so you'll run into monkeys, crocodile farms, all kinds of wildlife. The Malaysian sun bears. There's a lot of neat animals there. A lot of times you'll see them in zoos and not so much in the city, because mostly missionaries are in the city, but there's a lot of neat wildlife there. My favorite was probably mie goreng. It's just like the traditional fried noodle. You can get it anywhere, but they have it in different varieties in different places. So that was my favorite, mie goreng. One time I had python meat. That was different. That same day I also had squirrel meat, which was kind of unusual. I never got that sick personally. You would have missionaries sometimes that would get sick for 3 or 4 days. Usually they'd eat something, and they'd have diarrhea or a fever for a couple days. That's about it. There were, in the deeper parts of Malaysia, there are incidences of malaria and dengue fever, but usually those are pretty well controlled in the cities, and so it's pretty rare for missionaries to get those diseases because we're always in the cities and they're not a big of a problem in the cities. There are a couple of occasions where I came pretty close to getting hit by a car. As missionaries in Malaysia, we're always biking everywhere, and a lot of times you're just on the shoulder of the road, and so you've got these cars passing you that are going extremely quickly. Unfortunately, when I was there, we had one missionary, fantastic, outstanding missionary, who was actually hit by a car and passed away. And so safety is just totally paramount in the Singapore mission. You're supposed to be very careful when biking, you're supposed to wear reflective gear at night, and to not take any risks, because we have had over the past few years a couple of missionaries get hit by cars. Usually, it's not that severe. Sometimes they just, scrape up their hand, but we have had, I think in the year prior to when I was there, we had one missionary who ended up in the hospital for a few months because of getting hit by a car. And then, of course, there was one fantastic missionary who actually passed away when I was there after he got hit by a car. So, yeah, important to be safe. Be smart when you're walking around. I would say, when you're a missionary, obviously you're supposed to be with your companion all the time, and sometimes when you're biking, one in front of the other, if your companion starts going faster than you or slower than you, it can be tempting to just kind of like keep up with them and to kind of stop paying attention to your surroundings and the cars around you. But that can and has led to accidents in the mission, so it's important to be smart about keeping up with your companion or biking with your companion. Don't do anything stupid just because your companion gets really far ahead of you or is shortly behind you. So that's kind of the biggest safety tip, is to be smart on a bike. Realize that that people have gotten hurt on their bikes. Always wear the helmet, wear reflective gear at night, have flashing lights at night. Those were rules when I was in the mission, and I'm pretty sure there's still rules now. But yeah, be safe. Personally, I always felt very safe in Malaysia and Singapore. Guns are illegal there, and so it's not like some of the South American countries where people get shot at. We did have a couple of missionaries in the mission. I think only 2 that I'm aware of. Once got held up at Machete Point. But that was very uncommon. Like I said, never happened to me. Never even happened to anyone who was serving in the same city as me. It was always, there's only 2 incidents that I'm aware of, and I think they both involved missionaries who were local. I think there's kind of an attitude in Southeast Asia that you don't harm guests, you treat your guest well. And so I'd say that on the whole, Americans tended to be treated pretty well by foreigners, or pretty well by the Malaysians, because they're foreigners and they're kind of like guests in the country, and we want to give them a good impression of Malaysia. And so I always felt like I was treated very well there. It's not uncommon in Malaysia or in Singapore for missionaries to have immigration problems or visa issues. The governments over there just tend to be very sensitive, about people coming into the country. A lot of times sometimes there's drug dealers or drug smugglers that come into the country, for instance, or there's, in Malaysia, it's a Muslim country, and obviously it's against the law to preach to Muslims, but there are some Christian denominations in the U.S. that do that anyway. They'll send missionaries over to Malaysia to convert the Muslims. And so because of that, sometimes the governments don't trust, Western Christian churches that want to send people in. And so as a result of that, getting, even though, our missionaries keep all the laws, don't preach to Muslims, just Christians, just because of that dynamic, it can be sometimes a difficult, turbulent process for missionaries to get the visas they need, or even to get through immigration smoothly. So it's not uncommon in Singapore and Malaysia for missionaries to sometimes have troubles at the immigration office. So one interesting dynamic, I guess, I've said it a little bit before, but in Malaysia, and so many of the branches that I served in, all the members were converts. And that is so fantastic to see, the testimonies that they have, and how strong their faith is. But also that means that, they're still learning the church, they're learning how to give talks in sacrament meetings and give Sunday school lessons. All of this is very new to them. And so a lot of times you'll be in a church service that will seem, less than perfect, especially when you compare it to, some ward or branch in Utah where everything seems so well oiled. And so one of the biggest learning lessons for me on my mission was, people aren't perfect, and, we're all not perfect. And so if something isn't running perfectly in a church or ward or branch, or something seems like it's, not running the way it's supposed to be, like someone is assigned to give the lesson, but they show up and they forget, or they back out at the last minute, we're all not perfect. And that really, I feel like, is epitomized sometimes in Malaysia, is, we're no one's perfect, don't expect it, and just be accepting of everyone despite their imperfections. And that was a big takeaway for me, was just learn to appreciate everyone and the faith that they have, regardless of, whether or not they can teach a Sunday school lesson or something, if that makes sense. So that was a big takeaway for me. I think there's a lot of hard experiences. Obviously, when you have an investigator who's progressing a lot, and you get really hopeful for them, but then they fall through, or suddenly they don't have any more contact with you, that can be difficult. But personally, I just try to never really stress out about anything too much on the mission, because I figured, this is the Lord's work. Nothing can really go wrong. And so if someone decides to stop learning or drops out of the missionary lessons, then move on and don't worry about it too much. So that was the big lesson for me. It was neat to be able to watch people on their road to baptism. Some of the families that there was one family in particular that I got to teach that was just fantastic, and they were progressing really well, and it was almost. There's one family in particular I'm thinking of. They were probably the best family that I got to teach on my mission. And, they joined the church, and I felt like I hardly had to do anything to make it happen. With some investigators, I felt like I was working so hard, reminding them to keep commitments, reminding them to come to church, almost dragging them to church. Not quite, but, and things wouldn't happen. But every once in a while, and this happened for me with this one family, they joined the church, and it wasn't because of me. It was just, I was lucky enough to watch it happen and to watch their growth. And, I felt like God had, they were going to join the church, and God just let me be a part of it, basically. And so that was kind of a humbling experience where, I realized that, God is really in control of things, and it's so amazing to see Him guide people into the church, and to just be able to it almost feels like you're watching it happen sometimes. Like you're not like it's not because of anything that you're doing. It's just that these people are awesome, and they've found the church. One thing I did that I thought helped a lot was just to become really familiar with the country of Malaysia and Singapore before going there. So I just went to Wikipedia and just kind of read everything I could, because the culture is so very different from what it is here in the United States, that it was neat to get that background before going there. So that was helpful. Taking a mission prep class was helpful, just to kind of know what to expect on the spiritual side. And so those were good things that helped. Well, when I went there, and I don't think it's changed since then, they said that you only needed to bring one suit, which is very true. I mean, you only use your suit. Since it's Malaysia, it's right on the equator, it's super hot and humid there. And so you only really use your suit for like zone conferences and other really special occasions, sometimes for some church meetings. And so, yeah, it's basically just, if you're an elder, short-sleeved white shirts that breathe really well. And yeah, suits are not needed very much. You only need one. So